The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar, Best Practices and Tips to Customize Machine Translation for Technical Translation. My name is Christian Weisum from Across Systems, and I'll be your host for today's session. I welcome on this call also my colleagues from SYSTRAN, Stéphanie, Labroue, and Loic, René. Hello.
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 Hi, Christian. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Maybe some organizational matters up front. This webinar will be recorded and we'll put the recording on our website. You'll be informed about this via email. And also the slides shown in this webinar will be distributed to you via email. So you don't have to take screenshots. Everything will be coming right home to you. A second organizational thing, you can answer questions during the webinar. Please use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. We've decided, apart from very urgent questions, to put all questions at the end of the webinar, so do not be alarmed if you ask a question and you won't receive an answer straight away. We are putting this up to the very end. Okay, as Across Systems, we don't do a machine translation engine on our own, but I want to give you a short overview of why this topic is so important to us as a translation memory system provider. It is important to us because our customers are, of course, king, but the slide should rather represent the customers of our customers. And what they expect is to get more and more information in more and more languages at a very short period of time, and to have this content consistently translated across all the different channels that our customers are pushing content in. So they want to make sure that no matter which customer interaction, which customer journey they are accompanying, that everybody receives the same high degree of communication at the same time on a global scale. When I started with Across about 16 years ago, most of my customers were doing 5 languages, 10 languages. They were doing it sequentially. They were doing it if they couldn't avoid it in any other case. But today, it's a totally different picture. Customers are doing 20 languages, 30 languages. They have to do this in faster release cycles, and they have to do this at the very same time because the global audience, no matter where they are, they want to receive the same information, and not just in any language, but in their language on their choice. And the environment has also become much more complex, more content management systems, more machine translation engines. So everywhere you go, you come across content management or content creation software, and it's getting much more complicated to make sure, even on the source, that things are consistent. But of course, you have to ensure that also on the target language, things are consistent. And today, we're going to take a very close look at what the colleagues of SYSTRAN are doing to make sure that their client base is achieving those results. Because the huge carrot that we have currently hanging around in the language industry is machine translation, or to be more precise, neural machine translation engines. So, and it's got a lot of promises for the market. Faster turnaround times, more consistent quality, etc., more languages, speeding up processes, saving costs because you don't have to have human translations anymore, but rather machine translation and post-editing. A lot of things going on right now, a lot of things in flow. And at the same time, customers are still a bit reluctant because they see or have experienced machine translation sometimes as having problems in certain fields of expertise. And I brought 3 samples with me before I'm going to hand over to SYSTRAN so that we can all learn what they are doing about these kind of things. So on the one hand side, what we see as a problem point for neural machine translation, and of course also for translation memory technology as such, is that more and more XML-based translations are taking place. So not complete documents are going into those supply chains these days, but content chunks. And the problem with content chunks is that you gotta have context in order to translate them properly. And as you can see on the screen right now, it's a perfectly translated sentence. But if I would tell you now that this is no ordinary sentence, but a headline, all those of you speaking German will immediately say that, okay, the translation is okay if this was within a normal sentence, but since it is a headline, the translation is completely false and cannot be used like this. Okay, so how do you tackle the context problem on translation processes with machine translation or in the classical way? Second, we often see tone of voice problems, right? Again, here a translation that sounds quite nice, but in German, you would turn the sentence around, okay? So how do you tackle stuff like this? How can the machines be used to do stuff like this? And last but not least, we have to take the illusion away from a lot of people that you can use machine translation and translation technology as such without actually doing your homework. And the biggest homework we have here is still terminology and terminology management. What you see here is a screenshot out of our translation and post-editing environment. And I used a commonly available machine translation to translate a customer document. And you can see that within the same document, this machine translation translated the same very important term for this customer in 3 different ways. Okay, so it's important that no matter whether you use a human in your translation processes or whether you use a machine in the translation process, you have to know exactly what you want, and you have to define clearly, especially in terminology, what you expect in the translation to appear. And I also mentioned tags, because we often encounter machine translation engines that cannot work with placeables or tags or stuff like this. Like you can see in this case, that this machine translation engine doesn't support that at all. And we want to invite you to be individual in your process. Every customer we know runs different translation processes, slightly different, largely different, and it's good that it is like that. And so we invite you not to go for any best practice that is out there or for any methodology that is out there, but to take a close look at what you really need, what kind of content that you have, what quality expectation you have, and to work together with language consultants and your language service providers to find the best translation process for you to make most use of leverage of products like Across or SYSTRAN or what else is out there in the supply chain. Okay, and now is the time that I'm going to hand over my screen to Stéphanie.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Thank you also Across for setting up this session, and thank you everyone for taking time and attend this webinar. So I will quickly introduce the session, and then Stéphanie will share with you the best practice, the tips to train a generic translation engine with your data, in-domain data and data from your company. So the agenda, I will, Stéphanie, if you can, yes, thank you. So I will present the SYSTRAN marketplace, our worldwide community, why we decided to create this marketplace, and then Stéphanie will show you how to optimize, how to improve your machine translation output, and we will finish with the news, what's next between SYSTRAN and language and Across, sorry, and we'll finish by a Q&A session. So today, the machine translation market is divided in 3 categories. The first one is the cloud SaaS solution, with the advantage of a quick implementation, few clicks and use it. You benefit from the last generation of generic translation engine, and the objective of the marketplace is also for you to benefit of in-domain translation engine, and we will have a talk about it. Of course, it's not expensive if you process low translation volume with a pay-as-you-translate licensing model. If you can, Stéphanie, please, if you could go. Yes, please. The constraints, it's no control on terms and condition. Let's say it's accept or do not use it. Low, majority of case, low customization features. You cannot import your user dictionary. You cannot manage your translation memory. You cannot connect your CAT tool within this cloud solution. And you buy technology, but not a product, as you can do with an on-premise solution, for example. The second one is the do-it-yourself solution, which is a quite beautiful and challenging project. As you may know, 4 years ago, we co-created the Open and Empty AI framework with Harvard, and some of our customers started an empty project with this open source framework, and then they contacted us to move forward with the technology. Why? Because it's hard to follow the technology evolution. It requires high human skills, such as data scientists, language data scientists, linguists, developers, etc. And you cannot benefit from all the solution features, such as the document translation, such as PDF translation, no user dictionary support, no translation memory support. And the third one is the customized solution from a pure player. Let's say that it's what we offer with the SYSTRAN Pure Neural Server solution. So the advantage, of course, is that you benefit of a rich solution features to fit with multiple use cases. This is the best choice for enterprise-wide implementation. It's used by all the employees. There is a close technical and linguistic support. During months, you have project management before, during, and after to implement the solution, customize your environment, support you for the API integration, etc., etc. The constraint is the entry costs. If you process low volume, maybe the best choice is the cloud solution. But if you are looking for no volume limitation, the server solution will be the best choice. So regarding that, at SYSTRAN, we decided to include into our portfolio a new offering with the cloud solution, and all the solutions are linked now to our marketplace, the SYSTRAN marketplace, which is our worldwide community. And it's based on 4 pillars, 4 bricks. The first one is the technology provided by SYSTRAN, so the machine translation solution, but also the tool to train the translation engine with your data, and it's called the SYSTRAN modelStudio. The second pillar is the data, because you need data to train the engine. You can use your own data or use the data provided by the data provider. So it's in-domain data with transparency and traceability. You could find data from medical, automotive, IT, legal, healthcare, etc., and from many, many languages. The third one is the human expertise. We gather thousands of contributors, linguistic experts, translators, translation agency, etc., freelancers, to use the data and train the engine through the SYSTRAN modelStudio. The fourth one is the IT infrastructure. We collaborate with OVH Cloud to host all the system in strong cloud infrastructure in France, the north of France, with GPU capacity, because to train an engine, it requires graphic processing units. So let's hear a quick overview of the marketplace. So the community with data providers and trainers, they use the modelStudio hosted by OVH to train in-domain translation engines. As soon as the translation engine is trained, this is published on the SYSTRAN store and can be tested by and deployed by the end user, the customer. So the end user, which are actually the SYSTRAN customers, could connect on the SYSTRAN store and test by thousands of models. They deploy this model, translation model, within their SYSTRAN solution. So it could be the SYSTRAN Pure Neural Server, the SYSTRAN API, or the SYSTRAN Translate Pro, which is the cloud tool you can use to connect within your across environment. SYSTRAN Translate is available for free on the web to test text translation, generic and in-domain model. We have existing translation in-domain model from many industries. So what's the process to specialize an engine? So you connect to the marketplace, to your modelStudio, and there are four steps. The first one, of course, the data preparation. So you upload your bilingual in-domain corpus, and of course, your data remains secure and not used for other purpose. The second and third one is the training and evaluation. So you select within the SYSTRAN translation model catalog the one you want to train and start filling it with your domain-specific data. You start from a generic translation engine to benefit from embedded UD, so user dictionary sampling, filtering, noising, and tokenization. Then you evaluate the model at each training iteration with a SYSTRAN model scoring module. And as soon as it's okay for you, you see that the score is higher than the previous one, you can publish it in the model catalog. So there is three possibility. You, let's say, give it for free to the community, or you can sell it to the industrial SYSTRAN customer, or you can publish it privately if you aim to build it for an end customer. And it's, of course, your intellectual property. So I finished with this introduction. I will let Stéphanie share the best practice and tips, because the strategy of SYSTRAN is now to give the possibility of the trainer community to enrich the catalog by training in domain specialized translation engine. And the future, our industrial customer will also have access to this tool to train by themselves the engine.
Thank you, Loic. So in the coming section, I will be talking more about how to actually optimize the MT output. What are the tricks? What are the challenges for MT, and how can we overcome these? Before we actually go into the detail of our recommendations to optimize the MT output for technical documentation, let's have a look at how the SYSTRAN pure neural server solution works for those who don't know it yet, just to give you an overview of how it's built, how it works. So basically, whether it's hosted or whether you have installed it on premises in your IT infrastructure, the way it works is the same. First, there's an empty engine, so neural machine translation engine, which is most of the time the specialized engine, so one engine which is tailored to your domain, to your needs, to your documentation, which so this engine is combined with customer-specific linguistic resources, namely user dictionaries. So basically, it's term basis from the customer, reflecting the jargon, the terminology to be used in the documentation. We also have normalization dictionaries, which can be used in the system to either normalize the source or the target. As an example, these normalization dictionaries can be used to perform pre-processing to correct errors in the source, so as to make the source more MT suitable, which yields better outputs. The combination of the engine and the custom linguistic resources is made available to users through what we call translation profiles. And there can be as many translation profiles available as there needs to be to cover each use case within a company. For marketing, for technical documentation, for a specific range of products, for another range of products. So there can be as many translation profiles as needed to cover all these cases. So the first best practice we will discuss is the importance of the source. The way the source is written is really a major success factor in the output you will get from machine translation. Even with the latest neural machine translation technology, there are some challenges that you need to be aware of. You don't necessarily control your source, or you do not necessarily have the tools or the processes to completely control the source, but I think it's important to understand the impact of typical pitfalls that the MT can fall into regarding the way the source is written. So based on our experience with our customers, we've identified some gold rules. The first one, and the main challenge for MT, is definitely ambiguity. So we should, when writing, try to avoid as much as possible ambiguity. If a human is unsure of the exact meaning of a sentence, then let alone the MT. Ambiguity is the biggest challenge for MT and for marketing contents, as an example, where very often we see double meaning on purpose. This is highly challenging for any MT system. So we need to have this in mind, and when writing technical documentation, we need to avoid ambiguity as much as possible. Use the active voice is another advice, because the active voice is a style which cuts down vagueness and ambiguity and conveys a more direct and explicit meaning. We need to leave out unnecessary words, so get rid of words that do not contribute to the meaning. This removes noise and complexity, and it's also easier for the normal reader to read. So it's not just for MT that this advice is valid. We should avoid anaphora. So for non-linguists or non-specialists, just a word around anaphora. Anaphora is the use of a word referring back to a word that was used earlier in the text. As an example, he, she, or it in a sentence may refer to many things. Was it the solution? Like in we need it to work. The it, does it refer to the solution, to the process, to a methodology? So it's a challenge for MT to identify this. We should state the noun again instead of having anaphoras, because there are certain languages like the French and the German for which the it can be translated many ways. It could be feminine, it could be masculine, it could even be neutral. For the German, it's very challenging for the tool to identify what was the noun we were referring to. And we would write, instead of we need it to work, we would rather write, we need the engine to work. And this is completely explicit. Also, we should, as much as possible, use the definite article rather than the indefinite one. Try to specify nouns using the, as the machine translation engine can struggle to distinguish between verbs and nouns. A lot of short nouns can also be verbs, like skip, bank, return. So to remove any ambiguity, introducing the definite article before nouns removes this ambiguity. Instructions and user manuals often omit the definite article. We should also avoid, as much as possible, idioms, metaphors, slang, colloquialism, and abbreviations. The machine translation system may not convey the correct meaning of colloquial or idiomatic phrases, and the meaning may not make sense to international users anyway. Another golden rule is to avoid too long and complex sentences. The general rule or advice we could give is to keep the sentences between 5 and 25 words, as this is the length that is the easiest to handle for an MT system. And by the way, too short sentences are also quite a challenge. So sentences of less than 5 words can be very ambiguous and can be problematic. So we would recommend to try and target between 5 and 25 words whenever possible. And we see here in the examples we have on the right that even punctuation matters. In the first example, there's just a comma and an exclamation mark missing, but it can have a big impact, as you can understand. So source is one thing, but as said, we do not always have tools or processes to better control it and make it empty suitable. So then the best practice number 2 we'd like to share is that whenever there are translation memories available to train, to tailor an engine to your specific needs, this should definitely be done. This is what SYSTRAN is doing for its customers through what we call the specialization, which Loic already described briefly. So it means tailoring the engine to existing contents and terminology. How this happens is, as Loic said, we train our generic engines using huge corpora, so multi-million sentences corpora, publicly available or acquired by SYSTRAN. And these multi-million sentences that we train our generic engines with already make the generic engine quite robust. Our aim is to capitalize on this knowledge and just add a relatively limited number of customer-specific segments to specialize the engine so that the generic engine is still capitalized on. This makes the engine, the specialized engine, more relevant on technical jargon, terminology, and corporate phrasing, with relatively few customer-specific data. Our customers rarely have translation memories with millions of translation units. We rather see translation memories with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of segments, and the specialization is definitely the best option in this case. The impact on productivity is quite significant with the specialization. We see a gain of about, well, between 20 and 50% increase in productivity through the specialization compared with the baseline engine. And we measure this with our customers during proof of concepts and projects where they actually track down the productivity increase. How the specialization is done. So Loic mentioned that we have a tool to allow our customers and our teams to specialize engines. And this is the modelStudio. So I wanted you to see how it looks like and see the interface briefly. So in the modelStudio, you can filter on any language pair to see existing models and identify the best generic engine that you can start the specialization from. So here we see a purple bubble around this training iteration. And each bubble you see here in the middle represents a training iteration, so a training cycle with associated blue score. Blue score is a commonly accepted quality or automatic quality measure in the MT business. It's not the only one. There are others which we'll also use, and the blue score is just one of them, which allows to quickly see how an engine is evolving and what would be a good candidate. So here we see this purple circle around the bubble in the middle, which indicates that this engine is apparently the best model to start with, to start from. And there's an option which allows us to train a specialized engine from this engine, which has a strange name here. So before that, we need to upload our corpora to a share on a GPU server. And then when we train from the generic engine, it will launch subsequent iterations based on this engine to further train the engine and specialize it on the corpus. When the training is complete, we assess the quality of this engine through automatic scores analysis, which is one thing, but also through human evaluation. So we can see here scores on various test sets, and we can have a very precise test set for a specific use case here in the list, so as to measure how well the engine, the specialized engine, is performing on this typical content. And then have a look at the actual output as a human, as a linguist, to identify qualities and defects in the engine and try to fix these if possible. How to fix these can be done through terminology. If we identify that the main problem is terminology, we can fix it also by creating artificial corpus, so creating artificially sentences that correct the flow of the engine and putting this as corpus in the training and run a few more iterations. How do we prepare the specialization corpus, or what are the recommendations to prepare this corpus? So first, the supplied corpus must be as large as possible. The more data there is and the more robust the model, so the engine, will be. As a target, we often tell our customers that the ideal volume should be slightly, well, it should be around 100,000 aligned segments, so aligned sentences. We don't necessarily always get this volume, but we can talk about this in the Q&A session if you have any precise worries or questions around this. Second, the corpus must be really representative of the use, so representative of the contents of the type of documents that need to be translated with the specialized engine. The more narrow and specific the domain in the specialization corpus, the more accurate the output. So it's best to train the engine with more specific data, even if the volume is slightly less, than to be training an engine with a huge translation memory but containing very mixed type of contents. The corpus must be provided in the form of a translation memory, either in TMX format or in btext format. We should, if possible, avoid incomplete segments, so truncated sentences as an example. Avoid misaligned, non-aligned segments, so sentences for which the source does not match the target. If we know that if we know that the sentences contain some errors or inconsistencies, we should definitely try to remove or fix these segments if possible. On the other side, on the opposite, it's not recommended to remove segments, so sentences with translation alternatives. When you have one source which can be translated many ways, it's really good to have these alternatives in the translation memory, as it will tell the system a lot. It's actually very valuable information for the engine. And we also recommend to create a 1,000 sentences test corpus, which is not taken from the translation memory, but which is an external source of data. So 1,000 lines or sentences from a typical content to evaluate the quality of the machine translated output on this test corpus, instead of a test corpus which is extracted from the translation memory, as we know that even if we don't include the test corpus in the training cycle, it's still a bit tricky to make sure that the test corpus we've extracted from the translation memory is not too close from the training corpus. So having a completely external corpus to perform the human evaluation is really good. And if you do have a term base, if you have terminology, it's possible to use it during the training process, during the specialization process, to actually reinforce the terminology. So this is very useful data to use during the process. Of course, part of this can be achieved, or part of the typical issues in corpora can be fixed through scripts. When you upload or when you prepare the corpus, there's part of these advice which can be performed only manually, such as removing segments containing non-errors. But as for incomplete segments or misaligned segments, there are automatic scripts and tools which can be used to remove these, with still, of course, a proportion of segments which would not be caught by the scripts, of course, but can be automated in a way. Third best practice we share with our customers when they implement MT is definitely to customize then the translation output once the engine is trained it's rolled out on the server, and we can continue to customize it in real time, so our customers are completely autonomous in customizing the NMT output afterwards with their terminology. Many MT systems have some mechanism for terminology management, so they have a system in place to handle nouns, proper nouns, without any management of the inflections. So the plural form as an example. It's basically most of the time a search and replace functionality. SYSTRAN on the other side, thanks to a 50 years history and a long rule-based history and legacy, SYSTRAN is able to manage inflections so as to also handle verbs as an example, and manage the conjugated forms of a verb as we see here. So introducing the verb in the dictionary in its unconjugated form allows the system to detect the verb in any sentence, regardless of the way it's written, if it's the unconjugated or the conjugated form, and then applying the correct conjugation in the translation. Also, the same happens with nouns, and the system is able to inflect determiners and adjectives around nouns so as to make sure that these are in agreement with the noun. So this is quite unique. This allows to, it's very powerful and really allows for a quite seamless integration of customer-specific technical terminology in the machine-translated output. And another recommendation, once the system is rolled out to the users and available for them to use it, post-editors, so translators using the system, or collaborators using the MT engine just for a gist, just to understand documents, it's very important to collect their feedback. Users would have access to custom profiles, translation profiles, calling a given engine, calling a specific terminology to cover their use case. You can follow the usage for each translation profile via statistics to understand the use which is made of each translation profile, and really focus your attention on tackling the issues where there's the biggest volume or the highest challenges in terms of time to market and quality. When you capture feedback from your users, well, first, there are different ways to capture this feedback. There can be features in the tool, like the SYSTRAN Pure Neural Server feedback collection feature we see here, where the user can click on improve this translation, and a form allows the user then to give more information on what improvement is needed. But it's also recommended when you are more in a productivity use case where translators use MT as a basis to post-edit and produce a final translation. It's recommended to use an external form or to collect feedback as to know how they did like the post-editing and why. It's important to have open questions also to allow them to express or to explain their experience, and the rating then from 1 to 5. What did they think of the translation quality and why? How was the fluency? How was the accuracy? How was the terminology? And this allows to focus on the most important feedbacks and convert this into actual linguistic assets in the system. So user dictionaries, normalization dictionaries, or even feedback to create artificial corpus for future specializations. This is really gold data that needs to be captured during the use of the system. Last tip, we recommend that there is a seamless integration of MT into existing workflows. Indeed, we should try to make the integration, MT integration, as transparent as possible. And we should try to disrupt the translation, the translator's habits as little as possible. So post-editing is already a task which is quite new or can be quite challenging because it's something new. It's neither translation, it's not editing, it's not review, it's something completely different. It's a new skill that many translators need to acquire. And to make this acquisition as smooth as possible, we recommend to integrate the MT into their existing tools. We see here the output of the SYSTRAN integration in Across, where the segments are already pre-populated with machine translation instead of translating from scratch, which really increases the translation speed and reduces the costs. It's a simple process to integrate the neural SYSTRAN pure neural machine translation into Across. We see here the number of steps that are needed. So it's basically just about creating a new project template and then applying this new template to any newly created projects. I'm now done with the best practices. If you have any specific questions regarding any of the tips we've shared, don't hesitate to ask them during the Q&A session.
Thank you, Stéphanie. Just before moving on the Q&A session, so what's new, what's next? So between the partnership with SYSTRAN and Across, you can now get 1 million characters credits free per month to test SYSTRAN via your Across environment. So please contact your Across sales manager or come back to me and we will synchronize the request. If you want to process more volume, or if you want to customize your translation, use industry-specific translation engine and translate documentation, you can upgrade your free offering with the SYSTRAN Translate Pro, which is the new cloud-based offering available now. The second topic is at the research and development stage. This is a new features to automatically import across term base into SYSTRAN as a new user dictionary, as a new linguistic resources within your SYSTRAN environment. With the new cloud offering, there is also, as I said at the beginning of the session, the new community, the SYSTRAN marketplace, with thousands of translation models available for test. And as experts, you can also become trainers. So thank you, Stéphanie. Thank you, Christian. Here the latest slide just to share with you all the use cases by machine translation, because you are the ambassadors of this topic. You can use machine translation for translation productivity. This is the topic of the session today. But also you can integrate machine translation into within third-party applications such as Intranet Portal, your MS Office application, your chat apps, but also within the customer support ticket application to automatically translate customer requests, for example. We also have partners who use it for e-discovery to process huge volume of multilingual content from many languages to English for e-discovery, electronic investigation, and digital forensic. And since decades now, we have a huge customer database in defense and security since now 1968. So we are a provider of government agency in Europe, US, and Asia.
Yeah, with a strong concern on intellectual property,
Security.
but privacy and security, which many industrial customers also share. So I think it's now time for the questions and answers. Did we receive any questions during the presentation? I will now pause the sharing of my screen. Maybe we can have a look at the chat section.
Yes, this is Christian from Across. Thank you all from SYSTRAN for this very insightful presentation. We are very thrilled that my customer base is now entitled to use your MT up to 1 million characters a month. That's a really nice move, and we really think that this is going to have a huge impact on the way our customers will be working with machine translation and translation memory in comparison, and to make sure that, let's say, they can get the best out of these tools and out of their process. Questions that came in is, for example, around the way content from across is treated in SYSTRAN. And one question is, can SYSTRAN manage tags that come in via the interface?
Yes, the answer is yes. First, our engines, well, first the connector, the across connector, does push the tags to the SYSTRAN server during the translation process. And second, we train our engines in a way that they know how to handle tags. We try to teach the system and the engine which tags should be placed differently in the target. It's not always 100% correct, but at least the tags are there and they are quite well managed.
Okay.
And there's even a way, by the way, this allows me to make a point around the context. In your initial slides, Christian, you mentioned that headline could be translated completely differently from description in the documentation, as an example. And that's something that we can first train our engine to learn. If the content you are translating and the translation memory contains such tags, such as headline or description steps, this is something we can use during the training process to tell the system that this is a headline, it should be translated in a given way. This is the same sentence, but in a description and should be translated differently. And then this tag can be activated in the translation profile. We can use classifiers and have the same engine, which can be used to translate both the headlines and the descriptions, but we just need to get the information from the content that gets translated that it's a headline through the tag, and this would target or trigger the corresponding translation, or the training that was done will retrieve this information from the text to translate.
Okay, I completely understand. We have the same issue with content management systems. You know, some tell me, okay, I'm sending you a headline, and for some content management systems, the tags are always the same, like P or TU or something like this, right? Where there's no way to distinguish what's really in there. Is there any additional information? So it's quite a hard battle we sometimes fight with content management system providers to make them understand that the translation world needs a bit more than just
granularity. Yeah.
That XML content. Yeah. Okay, so that was one question: can SYSTRAN manage tags in across? And you gave a good answer for this. There's a couple of more. I mean, the questions coming in regarding this terminology integration. And so when do you think this is available? Is this already finished?
Oh, yes. Yeah. We have this level of terminology integration since, I think, almost 2 years or 1.5 years. So yeah, it's the integration is done. It's complete. For many of our languages, we do have this level of integration, which allows to manage all the inflections for the nouns, for the verbs, to really maximize the impact of the terminology integration on the output, with limiting the number of edits necessary by the professional translators to make it plural or change the adjectives and everything. It's not available for all languages, though. It's available for the languages for which we historically had either rule-based, and we do have a lot of languages for which we did have rule-based, or for which at least we had some morphology analysis tool, and we're able to perform some inflections.
Okay, I think the question really meant this new terminology integration that Loic mentioned in his slide, that you can directly synchronize cross-term with your training engine, right? That's available. I think.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
I think that's in one of the latest across patches. Can that be, or is that not released yet?
I think it's still in development. From the last discussions I've had with the R&D team at Across, they were still working on it 2 weeks ago, but it's something that I'm sure is quite an active development at the moment. There are pressures, I think, from customers to complete this integration.
Yeah, I know that also. And the way this will be done is that the moment we are sending XML streams towards SYSTRAN to be translated, we will be sending along in real time also terminology information, right? So it's directly embedded in the data stream. So it's not something that you have to set up manually or configure manually. This will be a default function for the Across and SYSTRAN integration, so that every time we send data out, it'll be accompanied by the respective terminology so that the engine knows in respect to this what to do. But it's not released yet. I'm pretty sure it's not released yet, but it should be in the 1 or 2 next patches, which all of our customers will, of course, receive free of charge. That's not the problem. Okay, one question that came in here is, how does SYSTRAN handle formal and informal address, especially if you translate the English you?
Yeah, very important and interesting question. Well, this comes back to the tagging of the content that I was just explaining. Well, we now know that it's possible and it's very efficient to actually tag contents to tell the system during its learning step that some contents are formal contents and some others are informal contents, so that the tool really understands that informal means that it should be translated by tu or du in German, and formal one should be translated differently. So tagging the contents to tell the system that this is formal, this is informal, and then having one engine being able to translate the 2 types of contents by just activating an option. So basically, it's just about activating informal or formal option in the translation profile once the engine has been trained with such tags. And this allows to really get the preferred output for specific use cases.
I mean, coming also back to this question from the Across end, that's exactly the way why we made configuring MTs in Across Language Server very, very flexible, right? So you can link directly across architectures or structural settings with the choice of the MT engine, right? So you can say, this is a project with formal content sent to a different engine than if you would be translating a project with informal content, right? Because you have customers that have both in their communication strategies. And if you go into the settings on Language Server on this, you can say, okay, pick this engine for this, pick that engine for this. We made this originally because there are, of course, a lot of MT engines out there, and sometimes customers need to mix, or let's say language service providers need to use different engines for different end customers. Different engines for different end customers. And the problem with there is then, of course, that you have to make sure that the right engine is chosen automatically and that the project manager doesn't have to think about this each and every time he or she does that anew. Okay, one question that comes in, I think this is one I can answer, is what would be an example of informal use case? We've got customers in Germany that address their clientele with du and not with sie, right? These are young companies, hip companies. So it's quite usual that for some user groups and for some publication channels, people are not, addressed in the formal way, but in the informal way. Okay, another question. Why the several variants of one translation is useful for NMT as we try to achieve homogeneity in terms of terminology? Why the several translation? Okay, I think this is for SYSTRAN. Why are several variants of one translation useful if you want to achieve homogeneity?
Yes, well, If it's about terminology consistency, then of course it's always better when there is only one possible translation for each source term. So for terminology, it's best. It's definitely best when there is consistency. For the more about the phrasing and syntax, how structures would be rendered in the target, it's very useful for an engine to have alternatives so as to allow the engine to learn how to say it differently and how to be more flexible, adaptable. But for the terminology, it's completely true that the more consistency there is in the translation memory and the more accurate and predictable the output. Still, we try to, or we tend to force the terminology to be quite consistent by adding the term base to the training data. So even if the corpus is not completely consistent, but we add the term base, this reinforces the correct terminology. It will not ensure that the term base is followed systematically. This is something that needs to be done by importing the term base in the system once the engine has been trained. So it's more on the customization side that this is possible. But on the training step, we tend already to reinforce the official consistent terminology by adding this term base to the training data.
Okay, and in addition, something I can add to this is that terminology is, of course, a living thing. So terminology may also change in the future, right? So
and that's why it's that's why it's very important to be able to then modify the terminology and make sure that what you're giving as fixed latest terminology in the system is what you get in the output, regardless of what was trained.
Exactly. So that's one of the reasons I have a lot of customers who say, okay, if we do not use a specific term anymore, we are deleting this. And we always tell them, no, never delete terminology, just use it as deprecated or out of use or stuff like this, that the translators that use this term for a long time know, okay, the new thing is this, that was the old thing. And it's similar with neural machine translation, that it can make a cross-reference and then use this information again to get better on things. And this is just that it's a living thing, and I'm sure all terminology consultants on this call will agree that you have to make sure that the same problem is with translation memories, right? You have a bucket full of translation memories, and then you change terminology. What do you do then? You have to clean it up. Do you do it in one go? Do you do it in the process, and so on? How do you handle this? So a couple of questions, quite complex. Maybe it would make sense to have a separate webinar just for that.
Yeah, interesting topic. By the way, having a list of deprecated, sorry, okay, old terminology, old terminology and recommended terminology is definitely something that can be turned out or can be converted into a linguistic asset in SYSTRAN with a target normalization dictionary, where we would automatically replace the deprecated term. By the correct one.
Okay.
So keep track.
The next question that I have here is, how do you provide the terminology in the learning process? Just by building dictionaries, or is there the possibility of the system to do term extraction on the translation memories during the training process?
It's something that,
from the across side, we have a bilingual term extraction feature that works on the translation memories. So this is our own little machine translation algorithm, if you like. So if you have translation memories, we can use those to build term candidate lists, either bilingually, so we can extract stuff that you had never had before, or we could tell the system, based on the translation memories, please provide Russian proposals for all terms we already have in English or in German, right, to fill the gaps based on the knowledge in the translation memory. So a cross-language server has built-in features for this. It's called cross-mining, and every across installation supports that for the translators, LSPs, or for the industrial customers. But I'm sure, SYSTRAN, you have something similar, right?
We do indeed, but if cross-mining allows customers to be able to extract this terminology and have a look and really, well, maybe not go through all the entries, but try to quickly filter this resource. This is a very, very valuable data then to use during the training process, because while it's already something that happens during the training process, this terminology kind of extraction and building the vocabulary, if you are able to provide a list of terms which is accurate, validated, it will definitely reinforce this terminology and will ensure that it's as accurate as possible in the output, which is quite central for technical documentation. So yeah, most of the time we receive quite raw term bases from our customers, where we do have a mix of quite old and quite new terminology, sometimes not always up to date. And well, the more we filter the terminology upfront, the better it is.
I mean, it's the same algorithm we use for predictive typing, right? When you start writing a sentence, that we can automatically propose how you want to finish that one. And it's the same, it's machine learning algorithm that does this terminology thing and this predictive typing stuff. And it depending on from which angle you approach this. Now we've got a question from the south. We have thousands of texts containing product names, brand names, technology names that of course should not be translated. They also have to be tagged in the training process. Is there a possibility to automate this? I mean, you would need a list of those, right? It's not just that you can identify what's brand name and whatnot.
Ideally, if you have a list, then it's very easy, because you can just import this in the system as a list of do not translate terms. Yep. And this will be preserved during the translation process, which is the ideal process. If you don't, but your contents has tags to identify what should not be translated, this is something we can teach the system during the training process, that terms between these tags should not be translated. But if you don't have any tags in your contents and you don't have a list of such product names and technologies, it's more tricky. We would need then to find a way to extract them. The cross-mining tool could be probably a way to do it, or we could probably extract it from bilingual data.
I mean, we have customers that do this in two ways. One way is to manage this via terminology and entering there, for example, do not translate this product name. The second option that there is, and very often the problem with the customers is that they have these items not tagged as such. So because they write it in InDesign, they write it in Word, they write it in PowerPoint, they write it sometimes even in XML and don't tag it accordingly. I mean, if it follows a structural thing, we can use regex to identify them and lock them away, right? So when stuff is read in and we say every word followed by the trademark symbol should be locked away. Or all patterns like product numbers or everything. If, let's say, for example, you had in your presentation a cross-language server and across you had with a small a, but our brand name really is a capital A and not a small a. So we can identify this and make sure that, let's say, this stuff is locked away for the translation, which is cool because then it's a placeable and not a word and doesn't affect the word counting and the pricing according to that. But
that's true.
Yeah, but it would be best to have a list, if that's possible, for the engine to learn, or to convert this into placeables before sending it out in the first place, because then you don't have to teach the engine. The only thing is, of course, you should only lock away stuff that is not translation relevant, that does not take inflections in the respective languages. There's a couple of things to consider, so we shouldn't overgeneralize that. But there's various ways of doing this.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the last question we had in the questions tab, but we still have 50 people on this call, so 50% of the total audience are still with us, which is nice. Thank you very much, because we are already 20 minutes over our time. Again, as a reminder, the recording will be put on our webpage to look at again. We'll send out the slides via emails directly into your inboxes. So I think Across will send the Across slides and SYSTRAN will send the SYSTRAN slides. And of course, you can contact us directly anytime in case you have questions afterwards. You will receive the contact details of the colleagues of SYSTRAN, and of course my contact details are on the screen right now. And now, since there seem to be no further questions, I thank you all for your time today. Again, thanks to SYSTRAN for co-hosting this webinar with us. I think it was really interesting.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for this opportunity to share some of our daily business with the customers. I hope we could bring some important information that will help customers to introduce MT successfully. We're there to answer any further questions that would come afterwards. And of course, yes, we will share the slides. Thank you all for your time and participation today.
Okay, thank you all very much. Stay healthy, stay indoors, which is tricky with 27 degrees where I'm sitting at the moment. Yeah, and take care and bye-bye.
Yes,
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye, everyone.